Okay, you're all set.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for the August 19th special meeting of the Budget, Capital, and Personnel Committee. We have one big agenda item, and I just wanted to welcome everybody here from Insero, and might be most user-friendly if you'd all go around and just introduce yourselves. Jerry, you want to get started?
Yes, I'm Jerry Michelson, a partner with Insero CPAs.
Welcome.
I'm Colleen Stannard. I'm a senior manager with Insero.
Welcome, Colleen.
Leslie Spurgeon, partner with Insero.
Hi, Leslie. How are you?
Connor
And
Light, supervisor with Insero.
terrific. All right. Thank you. This is a lot of attention, folks. We really appreciate your being here.
Yeah, they must be bored.
Well, really not. No.
Very good, Leslie. Thank you. Well, why don't Kathy, I assume we don't have any public comment or anything, and there are no changes to the agenda. So,
No.
all right, Rick, do you want to kick us off here?
Yes, one of the main things which we'll do after the auditors present the financial report is pass a resolution, which will then be forwarded on to the legislature. The resolution simply accepts the audited financial report for fiscal year 2019. And we wanted to let you know that as the auditors present materials today, they're still marked preliminary drafts. So if there's any, whether they be small or substantive, we can make some changes to the documents. There's basically 5 documents that I've already forwarded on to this committee and the legislature. Read them all, I'm sure, very thoroughly, but their presentation today will try to encapsulate some of the most important ideas that as an auditing firm and a CPA firm that they feel management needs to know at the end of the fiscal year. We apologize for being about 2 months later than in most years, but it was a huge undertaking this year, mostly working electronically with the auditors. They were here on site a few days, but most of the work was done electronically. Of course, you know, we have 3 staff shortages here in my department. And so that all just seemed to add more and more time to the audit. So we're going to be able to take this time today to show the results of that audit and mark your calendars for September 1st. That's when I'll be bringing a PowerPoint presentation to the whole legislature to give my highlights of the fiscal year. So I'm going to turn it over to this whole team here. I'm sure they've divided up their presentation accordingly. So who's first? Colleen, are you first?
I think Jerry's first.
Jerry's first. Okay.
Well, welcome everybody, and I just wanted to briefly overview, the audit deliverables. Our primary purpose is to conduct a financial statement audit of the county. The financial results are very comparable to in the operating general fund of the county as to last year, 2018. So about 4.6 million plus addition to the net assets, their fund balances of the county. The audit is a very clean opinion as to no exceptions to that. To our opinion that your financial statements present fairly your financial position and results of operations, and all the various supplementary schedules, footnotes, disclosures, and financial statements are consistent with the primary financials. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce Leslie Spurgeon, who will walk through the various audit reports that are going to be delivered in the executive summary, and go from there.
Okay, thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry. Leslie, if you, or if Conrad's managing the screen,
Needs to be bigger.
yeah, if we can, if it can be any larger, even if we lose some on the button, that'd be great. Thanks a million.
Sorry, is
No,
that
it's okay. That's good.
It's good.
Okay, as Jerry talked about, the very first item on there is the unmodified opinion on the financial statements. Also in the report is our report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. And this is based on the audit of the financial statements performed in accordance with government auditing standards. And not only do we audit you under generally accepted auditing standards that are promulgated by the AICPA, we also audit you in accordance with standards that are promulgated by the GAO, Government Accounting Office.
I'm having a little trouble hearing.
Oh, really? Huh, is that?
Well, Leslie, it sounds like you're on a speakerphone from way far away. It's the quality more than anything.
Yeah,
Leslie, you just want me to take over?
well, let's see if you can you hear me? Okay.
It's a little better.
That's a little better.
Yeah, that's cool.
So we had no internal control deficiencies or material weaknesses or non-compliance that we needed to report. In fact, as we'll see a little bit later, we had a comment letter that all that was in there was information about new accounting pronouncements. So I think that is very remarkable given the size and the complexity of your organization that we had no comments. That doesn't mean that everything's working 100% accurately in every manner, because of course we don't look at everything, but very good report. And we also had our single audit, the compliance part of the audit, where we look at certain federal major programs, and Conrad will talk about that a little bit more in detail. As you can see, that number of $29 million, that is how many federal expenditures you had this year. So quite a lot of federal money that is going to support your program. The communication letter, that's a separate letter, and I'm not going to ask you to turn to it or anything, because I can just talk to the bullets that you see there. This letter is something that's required by auditing standards that we communicate every year. So that's why you see it every year. It is basically saying the same information. From time to time, it varies. The first one having to do with accounting practices. There were no new GASB pronouncements that we needed to implement this year. Oh, I take that back. There was one. It's GASB 90, which had to do with majority interests in other organizations. And it actually did affect you. It required you to recognize the college as a component unit. So in years past, you only recognized your equity interest in the college, which is in your, it's an asset in your statement of opposition. This year, not only are they in that same place, but there is a separate column in the financial statements for the college. And that's because you own a majority interest. Also, under accounting practices, it talks about significant estimates. So significant estimates in your financial statements are depreciation expense on your capital assets. And that is calculated using useful life of the assets. And then your pension and other post-employment benefits, that's your retiree health insurance. Those estimates are calculated using your actuarial determinations, both for the pension system as well as the actuary that you hire to value your retiree health insurance liabilities. Oh, okay. Also, under accounting practices, it talks about different footnotes. So the most sensitive, meaning the most material footnotes, are about your capital assets, your pension obligations, debt, and other post-employment benefits. And there is a separate footnote that we put in there on fund balance detail, and Conrad will look at that when we're looking at the information. Other parts of the letter, difficulties encountered in performing the audit, we had nothing like that. And I do want to thank Rick and his team for all the help that they afforded us during the audit. And not only them, but the folks that were with the different programs that we audited and major federal programs this year. I want to thank them as well. There were no corrected or uncorrected misstatements that we need to communicate. That would be anything that's more than trivial. No disagreements with management that I'm aware of. And management representations is just saying that we're going to have a letter that Rick will sign saying that we have all the information that we needed. There's nothing that he has not disclosed to us that would affect our opinion on the financial statements. This next one, consultations with other accountants, there were none of those. And no other audit findings or issues. Other matters, this section is just talking about our responsibility with required supplementary information such as the management's discussion and analysis, budgetary information, and some other information that's required by GASB, as well as the supplementary information, which is the combining schedules in there for non-major funds, and also the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So that sums up the communication letter. And as I said, the management comment letter, that just had some accounting pronouncements that we'll talk about. Well, I guess I could talk about it now since we're on it. So coming next year will be statement number 84, fiduciary activities. And this re-examines the definition of what is a fiduciary activity. So what it will affect is the agency fund. You're hardly usually aware of the agency fund. It's like the last set of statements in the financial statements. It's where things like payroll liabilities and that sort of thing live. They're assets that do not belong to the government themselves. Some of those components that are in the agency fund will now be reported in other funds. So it will require us to kind of look at all the different components that are in the agency fund and figure out whether under this new definition, they are still fiduciary and belong somewhere else or stay in the agency fund, which will now be called the custodial fund.
Excuse me, Conrad, could you make it a little bigger again? What's on the screen? Thank you.
Okay, the next one, leases. This is similar to if you've been working with not-for-profits or even commercial entities. There's a similar FASB for leases. And what this does is we look at your material operating leases, and material operating leases will now be capitalized under this new pronouncement. So you'll recognize a right to use asset and then a corresponding liability. And then statement 92 is really kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of different things, nothing that is really significant for you. But we'll look at each one and see what the effect will be. So that's the new pronouncements that are coming up in the next couple of years. So that's the management comment letter. The other report that we issue as part of the audit is called the state single audit. And that report looks at the state transportation funds. So money that you get from state DOT, they require you to do an audit of those funds as well. So we did test CHIPS and STOA money primarily when we did that one. So that's the schedule of state transportation funds expended. So this year there was about $16 million. And we had an unmodified opinion on those financial statements and no compliance issues. So that about wraps up all the reports that we issue as a result of the audit. So with that, are there any questions? Then I will turn it over to Colleen. She's going to talk a little bit about the audit process.
And I'm going to keep it short. So I'll just go over in a broad view of what we do in the audit process. One of the first things we do is establish, we get an engagement letter when we talk about the scope and timing of the audit. We issue a communication letter to those charged with governance. And then we get an understanding of the internal controls over financial reporting in order to plan our audit procedures. We use a risk-based approach, and we determine the most significant accounts, and we do analytical and substantive procedures where we look at some of your largest line items in the financial statements, and we vouch transactions to make sure that they are fairly stated. We don't look at everything, or it would take us a full year to audit it. So we pick a representative sample and to satisfy ourselves that your financial statements are fairly stated. And that sounds like we ought to be able to do it in 4 hours, but it takes a while. I'm going to let Conrad talk a little bit about the single audit, which is specific to federal awards. If anybody has any questions or wants more detailed information about the audit process, speak now.
Yeah, I would invite, since I can't really see the screen plus hands raised, go ahead and, speak out, unmute yourself and just ask your question if you have one.
Martha, I had a question that I should have asked previously, but I was curious about this issue of TC3 becoming a component and wondered what that really means with respect to our ownership and operation of the college.
All it really does is affect how it's reported in the county's financial statements. It now has a separate column in the government-wide financial statements like soil and water and the public library do. In previous years, it was not reported as a component unit. It was just part of the county's equity interest in joint ventures along with TCAT. Now, it still is a component thereof. However, all this did was require it to be reported as a component unit like these other entities. It's really small again, Conrad.
So our partner, Cortland County, do they report it the same way or not?
They do not, because Tompkins has the majority interest. It's about a 62-38 split, I think.
Yes.
So since you have more than the majority interest in the college, all you're required to do is put their financial statements as part of yours because they're a significant component unit.
And I'll say we do have a footnote that describes the different joint ventures, because it's also a joint venture. And it does, in that footnote, outline what your percentage and what Cortland's percentage is. So, it's pretty clear what the relationship is, I think, from that footnote as well. So it doesn't really change anything. It's just how it's being reported in your statements.
It doesn't change. That's a good question, Mike. Doesn't change our fiduciary responsibility or anything else. The structure of that doesn't change.
Does not.
Okay, thanks.
And we encourage questions as we go.
Okay. Were you finished, Colleen?
I think I was. I was going to have Conrad talk about the single audit a little bit.
Okay, great.
Unless he doesn't want to. I don't know where he is.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted myself. So in addition to the the regular audit, we also do a audit of your federal expenditures on a yearly basis. So with this, we follow the rules of the Yellow Book. We also look at the controls over certain programs as well as the compliance over those controls. So this year, as Leslie had already mentioned, there was about $30 million in federal expenditures for the county, which was up quite a bit from the prior year. So with that, there were some programs that we were required to test due to them being what we call type A, being over $750,000 in total expenditures, and certain type B that we were to label as high risk type Bs. So in all, we tested about 7 programs this year for the county itself, ranging from their airport to a few coming out of your social services, as well as highway planning and construction. So all in all, we were able to finish or are in the process of finishing all that testing. And the county itself does qualify as a low risk auditee, which means our threshold for testing is actually at a lower threshold at 20% of your total federal expenditures. So of that 30 million, we really only have to test around $6 million of that. So that's what we ended up testing.
Do you want to show what programs we tested, Conrad?
Yes, I can.
I just want to say that we aren't quite done with the single audit part.
Actually,
Are we?
I have some late breaking news. One program that we thought was completely federal, I think is mostly state. So I'm getting some information from Jeremy over at Mental Health for the exact amount, but it is much less than we thought. And I don't think we have to test another program now.
So these are the programs that we ended up testing this year. What Leslie is discussing is this block grants for prevention and treatment of substance abuse program is what she is looking to get information from Jeremy about. So all in all, we tested the SNAP, community development block grants, the state program, airport improvement program, child support enforcements, and medical assistance program, which are over at DSS, as well as your highway planning and construction. Colleen?
What? Oh, up to me? I think you were going to discuss, we were going to go back to the executive summary.
Yep, I can go.
Somebody wanted to talk about audit fraud.
Conrad, could I ask a question?
Yes.
Can you show at the back of the financial statements, the CFA?
Yes.
Now I realize it might change. You can see it's about 4 or 5 pages at the very end of the financial report, and it breaks it down into different subcategories or programs. It's about a 4-page document of all federal grants. And as Conrad scrolls through there, you can see we get a lot of money from a lot of the feds. So let's not disdain them too much because they still are paying us. Maybe next year, maybe not so much, but federal money is a very important component. And you get down to the bottom here, you see we're right below $30 million. And that number might go down a little bit now if some of that comes out of federal and moves into the state grant category.
Offhand, does any of you know what it was in 2018?
Not the same. It was about $30 million.
About the same, okay.
It was a little less than $30 million, but yeah, it was comparable.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So these new stimulus grants, will they just be added to this list next year?
The federal stimulus grants, yes.
Yeah, like CARES and things like that we're getting.
CARES Act,
Yeah.
FEMA monies. Yes, some of those funds will be added.
I think a lot of small governments that haven't had single audits before are likely to have single audits this coming year.
Mhm.
Okay.
But you're gonna have one anyway, so.
So next we will discuss some of your numbers out of your fund financials. This doesn't deal with the government-wide conversions, such as which looks at some of your long-term assets and liabilities. This is more on the day-to-day basis. Apologize for that. So first we'll take a look at your general fund. So over the past 5 years, we can see that that your assets in your general fund has steadily increased from around $56 million to almost $70 million in the current year. A lot of that has to do with your cash being up as well, even though that has done a little up and down. But if you look at things like amounts due from other governments, that has steadily increased as well, from 15 million up to 20 million. All in all, your cash makes up about 46% of your total assets, actually 47% of your total assets for 2019. That raised about 7% over your prior year. But your biggest change that we really saw this year on the positive side was in your due from other funds, which raised about $4.6 million. A lot of that money is money that will be due from the capital fund, the transportation capital fund, dealing with a lot of the expenditures at the airport that General helped pay for this year. Another, on the opposite side, we did see a decrease in the due from other governments, and that has to do with a lot of the reduction. We saw a lot of claims that weren't paid at the end of 18, that wasn't received at the end of 18, but in 2019, they were on a more regular track where they were actually receiving a lot more funds before year end. So that actually led to a decrease in the due from other funds, the due from other governments. So overall, your assets increased by $2.3 million, some 3.5%. On the flip side, your liabilities decreased for about $2.3 million as well. That was actually a 13.6% decrease from the prior year. Some major changes with that were the major change was your accounts payable, which decreased $2 million as the county was able to become more timely probably in 2019 with the payments. There are some still outstanding, but that was more timely in the current year. As you can see, due to other governments was also a big amount within the general fund, making up some 31% of your total liabilities. As we look down, we get into your non-spendable amounts, your restricted amounts, your assigned and your unassigned, which make up your entire fund balance. Your unassigned fund balance, which is the residual, was $5.7 million higher, which actually really equates to what we saw as net income within your general fund. Your assigned fund balance was down but $932,000. That was kind of equitable to what we had seen with the fringe fund in the current year.
Can I interpose a question here?
Yes.
So as I understand it, and I'm not an accountant, our total fund balances is basically our total assets minus our total liabilities and deferred flows of resources. Since our total assets include monies due from other governments, there's $20 million in that particular line. Are we sure we're going to get all of that given what's been going on with the pandemic?
Most of that is federal monies through DSS of the due from other governments. Some of it is sales tax, which you've already received. Some of it is DSS claims, and those are pretty, they take a while, but you usually end up getting that. Is there anything in there that you think is questionable, Rick?
No, not for this year. As we go forward through 2020, as we make submissions and and reimbursement vouchers to the state and federal government. We've, obviously some things have been cut off, some things have been slowed down. We just seen how they rob more of our sales tax. We're going to be losing about $1 million next year between the AIM funding on one hand and that new removal of money for hospitals or whatever it is that the governor waved his wand and said you're going to get, between those two programs, we're going to get $1 million less in sales tax. So I think you might see some slowing down of funding from both the state and the Fed in 2020, but not as it relates to 2019.
I
So,
would expect the
Yeah.
payments to come in more slowly.
Right. The other thing to remember at the year end, as Conrad mentioned, a chunk of that, almost 10%, I think, was related to the airport, and that came in the end of January into February. So I think we had a couple $1 million as of the end of the year. So a lot of those $20 million we have seen come in, but as Conrad pointed out, that is a rolling figure.
Right.
But the airport is under the due from other funds, that 4.9 million. That's where the airport, and that's just some loans that we made to the airport when we run out of bond money and band money. Those are just extensions of credit that the general fund made to the airport to finish up projects. And so that's something that we do for a lot of capital projects. When a particular project runs out of money, we just fund it with the general fund and we pay it back. We call them due tos and due froms, and we just keep running these interdepartmental loans through the due tos and due froms.
Yeah.
did you have something else?
I guess my concern is just, and I don't want to burden Sarah with this so much, but my idea of fund balance in terms of what we have available to use to fill the gaps that we're going to be facing is pretty much limited to that cash. That's, I would really like at some point an updated, not from Insero obviously, but from our own people, an updated number on what's actually money in the bank and what's money we're still waiting for from other sources. Thank you.
What I would like to highlight here under fund balances, you can see that most of them have from non-spendable, restricted, assigned, they've all pretty much stayed within, a very small margin of where they were last year. You should note that we have a $4.8 million increase in the unassigned fund balance. With Jason, what all our unassigned fund balances are in all the funds. I shared that with him this morning, and I'll probably share that with you before this meeting is done here today. But after having sat through so many different budget hearings and budget meetings so far, especially the one that we just had earlier today, I just want you to be aware of the fact that our surplus of that, our increase in unassigned fund balance just from 2018 was $4.8 million.
Right. Thank you, Rick.
Rick, your audio breaks up a bunch in every sentence. Maybe if you.
My microphone. Okay.
I don't know. I thought, was it Conrad just said the unassigned fund balance is 5.7 million higher in 2019.
I believe Rick was talking about for the funds overall, and I was just mentioning the general fund.
Okay. And Deborah, were you kind of thinking about the Medicaid reconciliation money that's not?
Well, everything's pretty much up in the air. I mean, my experience with TCAT and Soil and Water and other agencies generally is that the money's really slowed down. And when it comes from the state, at least, it's 20% less than what is anticipated. So I guess, my understanding, I guess, is that this $20 million was money that was due from last year. And if we're really fortunate, the 20% cut and the slowdown won't impact those monies.
We can hope.
I will say, did a quick calculation, but your unassigned fund balance is about a little under 25% of what you spent last year. So, GFOA usually recommends about 15% or so. Yours is a little bit higher than that, which, you're going to need that going into 2020 and 2021.
Yes.
But, it is, I think compared to other governments, you're in a fairly healthy position.
Well, that's a piece of rare good news, so thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So you said we have about 25% for the unassigned fund balance, I think. So what would be 15%? You said, which is generally recommended?
That's a ballpark for GFOA. So you want to know what that would be, what 15% would be?
Right, approximately.
Gotta do that on my calculator, sorry.
Not in your head?
I'm an accountant. About 28 million. Is that right? I think so.
That sounds right. 15% of the appropriations, right?
28.
Leslie, what is that acronym you're using? GFOA?
It's Government Finance Officers Association. It's a state, nationwide organization, and then each state has its own chapter. But they do a lot of training and they do a lot of lobbying and things like that on behalf of governments.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Conrad, were you finished?
Okay. So I will continue on to your revenues, your revenues and your expenditures for the general fund. So overall, your revenues did increase $16 million over the prior year. A lot of that money was within your state and federal sources. There were some increase on social services revenue due to expenses for the current year. There was also some increased funding for STOA and ECHO in the current year, which also led to some increases. Or you also did see a $4 million increase in your real property taxes for the current year. And overall, your real property tax, your tax items, your non-property tax items, that really represents about $62 million of 62%, 60 to 62% of your total revenues from last year and even for this year. So those three items really do drive a lot of the revenue. In addition, your state and federal sources represent about 32% of your total revenue. So those 5 line items right there do drive a lot of your revenue. And like I said, the biggest increases were in your real property taxes, your state sources, and your federal sources for the current year. On the opposite side, your federal expenditures did also increase, but not by much, but only about $14.8 million. So about your revenues did increase by about $1.1 million over your expenditures. There were some increases, such as in your general governmental support that increased $5 million or some 15%. There was more money that was distributed to the towns and villages for tax reasons, but the expenses also related to your STOA and ECHO increase, as well as, as I said, there was increased expenditures over at social services. That increase was about $4.4 million over the prior year. So all in all, with taking in consideration your interfund transfers out, there was an excess of revenues and other financing sources in your general fund of $4.7 million, which is about $100,000 less than what you took in the prior year. Any questions? As we keep going, we take a look at your capital projects. looking at the balance sheet, so the county has a lot of capital project sub funds, from the library to the airport to various others. I do have to say that Rick and Drew do a great job in being able to navigate all the different sub funds within the capital fund to be able to keep all of them straight is a feat. So I thank you, Rick, for being able to keep those handy and for giving us the information the way that you do give us the information. So as we look at your assets, the assets did increase $1.7 million over the prior year, somewhat. Some 7%. Your cash did decrease by 7.2%, but your biggest increase was due from other funds. There was some amount that was actually an internal balance between the capital funds. Your HQ, which I can't think of, I think it's your capital reserve, was due money from your transportation capital fund. So that really led to the biggest increase within the accounts. On the opposite side, in your liabilities, one of the biggest increases was your bands payable. So the county did take about double the amount of bands in the current year compared to the prior year. But other than that, your payables did increase as there was increase in construction expenditures. There will be a correlation between the amounts that will be outstanding at year end and due to other funds. As I said, some of that was internally within the capital funds. Your transportation capital fund did owe the capital reserve fund, and there was an amount due to the general fund, as I mentioned, in the general fund due from where the transportation fund for the airport owed the general funds.
Yeah, the airport project is a driver in a lot of the numbers and this total capital projects fund differences.
Yes. So there, as you can see, your fund balances, they like as Colleen just said, it is a driver, which led from a total fund balance of $16 million to a negative fund balance this year of $272,000. But overall, like as I said earlier, your assets is up. A couple of these items did decrease, such as your assigned fund balance. There are certain of the funds within the capital fund do drive assigned versus your committed fund balances and your unassigned fund balance.
And the unassigned deficit fund balance?
Yes. Tell me about that.
Well, 10.9 million of it is bands payable. And governmental accounting, when you borrow short term, it's a liability. When you convert this to long-term debt, it'll be a revenue and it'll make your total fund balance positive again. How it's a revenue is only known to governmental people. But
and would probably make my head spin.
It would, but just know this is temporary. It's normal. It will not affect your day-to-day operations.
Okay.
That wasn't reassuring?
When I see $13 million in parentheses, it makes my heart go pitter-pat. Yeah.
Well, because not only the band, but because the airport borrowed money from the general fund. So once long-term financing is in place, that deficit will go away.
Okay, thank you.
It's not like you've got to suddenly raise a whole bunch of taxes to get rid of that or something.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Appropriations, but more than likely you're going to bond for all that.
Choose to believe you.
And the one thing I didn't mention when I was talking about your total liabilities, if you do see your total liabilities, they go from $7 million to 26, and a lot of that is your bands and the amounts that are due to your that will be due to your general fund.
Yeah, I was.
Breathe now. We're good.
Once you bond, once you do the permanent financing, the amount we pay back to the general fund and the bands will go.
Well, don't forget too that we've got some pretty good interest rates on our BANs. And
Right.
so even though we haven't converted these to long-term financing, we're saving some money because of the low interest rates.
Right. So
I am anxious come February. Go ahead, Leslie.
I was gonna say, it's not a bad thing necessarily to have a deficit in the capital fund.
And I'm kind of anxious to convert over to long-term financing, hopefully in February this year coming, so that we can show on our financial statements that these liabilities have gone away, and we'll replace that with bond revenue. Now, how much those bonds will be, we don't know the exact number, because we're still trying to examine every source of funding we can get for the airport, and we're trying to borrow as little as possible of the current $13 million that's outstanding in bans right now. So that's one of our projects going forward over the next 6 months, is to try to figure out how much of that debt will be converted over to long-term bonds, especially now when the market is still so favorable. Come February, I don't know where the market will be. I foresee interest rates going up because they really can't go any lower. I think that they are going to be going up. We just don't know how much they'll be going up between now and February.
Jason, were you going to say something?
No, other than it's not uncommon to have deficits in the capital fund when you're dealing with bans and do froms to cover costs. It's a normal thing. It's just the number is large here because you have a large capital project, $40 million capital projects, the largest capital project in the county's history. So this will go back to normal next year. After, if we do permanently finance next year, then you'll see it drop off. If we roll it, you may not see it the following year, but it's not an uncommon thing.
Okay, so we will continue on to the revenues and the expenditures. So before I even go to the revenues, I will point out the $33 million in expenditures that was spent in 2019, and most of that has to do with your airport capital project. So we are looking, as we've talked about, it's really causing a big increase overall in your expenditures. They increased by almost $26 million over the prior year. I don't know how long is the project going to be lasting for, but the expenditures shouldn't be that high going forward, or we shouldn't see those too high, correct, Rick?
Yeah, you're right, Conrad.
Okay.
Expenditures will be lower in 2020.
Okay. So I will go back up to the revenue side. So the biggest increase was in state sources. There was increased state airport funding in 2019. That a lot of that had to do with some of the single audit state single audit numbers. I will just show the UAI grants for terminal improvements at the airport. That was about $7 million. That was about $7 million itself. And that really led to the big increase in state sources for the current year. And that was the main driver of your revenues in 2019. So overall, there with your other financing sources, such as there was one piece of debt for $3.5 million. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're not showing us the executive summary.
Oh,
Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
So when we look at other financing sources, such as your interfunds transfers in and out, your proceeds of obligations, $3.6 million in new bonding this year, and there was a little bit of sales of capital assets. There was overall the excess of expenditures over your revenues of $16.5 million. As we go forward, we'll talk a little bit about your debt service. Really running through your debt service is mainly cash on the asset side. In total, your cash really accounts for 82% of your total debt service assets. Your securities and mortgages are mortgages that you hold with other institutions, such as I believe the Tompkins County Alcohol and Development and a few others. And that amount is amounts that will be due to you guys, but decreases on a yearly basis as they pay down on their amounts. It is actually equal to the amount that you have in your deferred inflows and your deferred inflows of resources of $4.7 million. So overall, that's really what we have on the balance sheet side when it comes to the debt service fund. On the revenue side, what we see is some intergovernmental charges, some use of money, which is mainly interest revenue, and some local sources, really about $700, almost $800,000, which is down. Your total revenues was down $400,000 from the prior year. Your main expenditures have to do with your debt service, your principal and your interest payments, some $6.5 million. That did decrease a little bit, but as you can see, it did increase from 2017. So overall, your excess of your expenditures over your revenues was 5.8, but taking into consideration your transfers in, we're looking at a excess of revenues over expenditures of $47,000. That transfers in actually comes from your capital fund. As we go forward, we look at your special revenue funds. Your special revenue funds consists of things such as your special grant fund, your refuse and garbage, your regular transportation fund, your road fund, and your road machinery funds. So overall, what we saw this year for those funds was a decrease in total assets of $2.1 million. Biggest decrease being that your cash actually decreased 2.1 as well. There was some increase of 1.1 million in your receivables, so that 1.1 of that 2.1, it just needs to be brought in from money that you are owed. On the opposite side, your liabilities did decrease to $1.3 million over the prior year. Biggest decreases being in your amounts that are due to other funds, usually due to the general fund in the prior year, but amounts were paid back, as well as your accounts payable as the county was able to pay on their bills in a more timely fashion than in the prior years. When you look at your fund balances, your assigned fund balance, which is what your residual fund balances would be for these other funds, did decrease by $600,000, by almost $700,000 over the prior year. And just looking at the revenue side and the expenditure side, what we saw was an increase of $1 million. A lot of that has to do with departmental income, as well as your use of money and property. Those two amounts increased $540,000. Along with your state sources, there was a total increase of $1.2 million, but there was mixed miscellaneous local sources, which did decrease by about $300,000. On your expenditure side, there was a slight decrease in your expenditures of about $309,000, mostly due to your home and community service line item, which did decrease $400,000. Overall, taking into consideration your interfund transfers in and out, there was an excess of your expenditures over your revenues of $700,000, which is less than what you had in excess in the prior year by about $990,000. Colleen?
So those are all your fund basis financials. In addition to that, when we issue the financial report, it includes your government-wide financial statements where we take all those funds, squish them together, add all your fixed assets, all your long-term liabilities and get to your net position. Can we look at figure 1? I'm just going to talk a little bit about the government-wide. I'm not going to focus too much on the enterprise fund. This business type activities, that's the new culture center. I know I can never remember the name of it, Rick. Anyway, you know where
Tompkins Center for History and Culture.
That's the one.
Tompkins Center for History and Culture.
That's what is in that column, basically. But what I was talking about, your government-wide, all of the governmental activities, that's all of those funds we just talked about, plus the internal service fund. So overall, your current assets were 94.5 million. Your total assets, including your capital assets, was 316 million. Deferred outflows of resources as they relate to pensions and OPEB. These are costs that you'll incur in future periods. And the liabilities overall, the current liabilities were about 38 million. That includes the short-term pieces of your long-term obligations. And this includes the county's bonds payable and those related to the task, because the Tobacco Asset Securitization Corporation, hey, that I can remember, is a blended component unit of the county and is rolled up into your figures. So overall, your net position, you scroll down a little bit. Your overall net position is 133 million. Now, for the scary part, the unrestricted net position is a deficit of 36 million. And in a minute, I will talk to you about that, because I have prepared a slide that's going to make you feel better. Do you want to?
Good Lord, I hope so.
You want me to make you feel better now?
Yes.
Okay. Can I share my screen at the same time? Can you unshare for a minute, Conrad?
Yep.
So what we have here is the net position I just talked about. And I just put in 3 periods because I started running out of time. Anyway, so I have the net position that we just talked about, which is the whole government squished together. The net investment in capital assets, that went up significantly, primarily due to the airport improvement project. Your restricted net position stayed about the same, and your unrestricted is a deficit of 36 million. Now, what you have to remember is that this deficit net position also includes these net pension liabilities, deferred inflows and deferred outflows of resources related to ERS that you have no control over. So if we were to add that back in, and if we were also to add in your OPEB liability and your deferred inflows and outflows, your actual unrestricted net position would be 54.5 million. Now, the OPEB liability is actuarially determined, and there's no way for you to fund it. There's no legal way in New York State to fund an OPEB liability. So it's always going to make your unrestricted net position look worse than it could be were you able to fund it.
Colleen, can you explain OPEB to them real quick?
Other post-employment benefits, that's the retiree health insurance. You actually budget for that and you pay it on an ongoing basis. This is actually projecting the net present value of all of the OPEB for people who've retired, people, and everyone who's active from now until they die. And they actually use longevity tables, so I can say that. But
So this is like that stuff that the post office has to fund that nobody else does.
Well, all big
Part of it,
corporations.
yes. Yeah.
All of your big
What do
corporations.
we do for an update on our OPEB? When do we have to do an update on it?
Well, now with gas.
We do it every,
5,
we do it every year. We do an actuarial valuation every year. And the big one we're working on right now. And then in the interim years, it's a smaller one based on the previous year's census. So we're gathering the census data now, actuaries to work on the next one. But Jason, we do that actuarial valuation every year.
So my guess is this will change probably significantly with the change in retiree health care that you did.
It'll actually, the one that we're working on right now is for the year ended 2019. So the year that affects that change that you're talking about will be the subsequent valuation for 2020.
you did good negotiating?
Essentially what happened is rather than providing a full health care plan for all Medicare eligible retirees, we shifted it to a Medicare supplement, which will significantly reduce, I think, the long-term cost and liability through this. So you may not see it the first go around, but it'll definitely, next time you do a full one, you'll definitely see I would say probably a dip in that number.
So I did want to take.
It's not real money.
Well, it's real money in the sense that it's essentially.
It's real money eventually, but it's not real money now.
Well, let's just put it this way: if you're paying cash, you're paying in cash now for liabilities that are due now. Meaning, as you experience those expenses, we're paying for it. If you were to continue to expand retiree health care, your expenses would continue to grow in real time. And to a certain extent, while this is an actuarial, it gives you some level of understanding of the value of the retiree healthcare benefits to balance against. So if this were to continue to grow, remember I've said the past few budget sessions is that your portion or your percentage of retiree healthcare as your total healthcare bill is increased over the past several years. If there was no course correction on this, you would continue to see of your entire healthcare bill on an annual basis, a greater portion of that would be attributed to retirees rather than active employees.
Yeah, I think you and I are talking about two different things. I'm talking about that $84 million.
Yeah.
That's not real money.
My point is that this is the actuarialized value of what that is over time.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry, Colleen, would you just tell me what the OP stands for? I missed that.
Other post-employment benefits.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
basically, if your liability will go down as it projects that change in your insurance.
Yeah.
Which is reflective of what will happen on a cash basis forward. Not one-to-one, you can't exactly extrapolate, but it's an indication that your costs are going to go down.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now that I've made you all feel better.
Thank
I
you,
was just
Colleen.
gonna-
You're my new goddess.
I'll tell
I
everyone.
was just going to add that the slide that Colleen just showed, that the $54 million adjusted net assets, so to speak, is actually substantially all in your general fund, your primary operating fund of the county. So it's within $100 and some thousand.
Mhm.
And that's the number shown in the executive summary and the primary financials.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all, the whole team, for the explanations and the questions. Are there any other questions that haven't been asked? Is there anything else to present to us?
Well,
I would just like to
for hours.
add. I would just like to add. I think the takeaways are that you're in your general fund, your primary operating fund, that there was an increase of $4.7 million. That increased your unreserved, unrestricted fund balance. So from that perspective, it puts you in a great place financially to absorb some of the downfalls that you're experiencing in the 2020 fiscal year, with decreased sales tax, potential decreased fundings, and due to the effects of the financial effects of the pandemic. So from that perspective, it's somewhat, the county is in a great position moving forward financially, and it's good that the last 2 years you were able to increase your net assets to support what might be different results for 2020. And also, your completion of your capital projects, being able to fund with long-term financing at these low interest rates is going to be helpful for the longer term. Again, with the other post-employment benefits, the variables that affect that value, actuarial valuation are the interest factor, longevity of lives, and other significant factors. So I think, the takeaways are your financial position was improved in 2019 from an operating perspective, that you had a clean audit opinion. There are no material weaknesses in internal control over financial reporting, no issues of non-compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and agreements. And, that should put you in a great place to system-wide procedures have, been modified and improved along the way. And a lot of credit goes to Rick, and Andrew, and the whole team. There was some personnel transitions there, and a lot of credit goes to our team too for, the fine job of correlating under different type of auditing processes this year and being able to have this meeting today.
Yeah, we understand this is, having remembered many years of your team sequestering yourselves in the small side of the old jail conference room and realizing, okay, those days are gone, at least for now. This is certainly a whole different process, and we appreciate everybody's flexibility in figuring out how to do it. I'm sure a big share of thanks also goes to our ITS department, sort of the people behind the scenes that are making all this work. A comment on the 4.7 million, which is great news, but it's already spent. So
I know.
say that.
But the resources, my point was the resources have been accumulated, especially the last 2 or 3 years, so that you're able to, for these downturns, you're going to erode the financial position of the county, but you have the cash resources and liquidity to adjust your and the leadership team in place to be able to, between the legislature and administrative components, to be able to make adjustments throughout the year for these changing conditions.
Well, that's our good fortune, and we'll see how long we can hold on to it. Mike Lane.
Question I probably should have asked sooner, but at the airport, I remember we discovered we needed to audit our passenger facility charges regularly. Are we up to date with those?
We have that scheduled. Conrad, refresh my memory.
We have it scheduled, I think, in about a couple weeks or a month for someone to finish that up.
Thank you.
Yeah, we
Are up to date.
Excuse me?
we got the engineers to help us put the components together for that. We got that back about 2 weeks ago. That outlines each and every project. There's probably 20 different projects when you add them all up at the airport. Now we have to fill in the rest of the schedule and conduct the audit. But we actually have to have completed our financial statements for the county to reference some of the notes in that PFC audit. So that's what we did last year, that we actually got the PFC audit done at the same time the county audit was being done. And we couldn't really wrap up the PFC audit before the county audit was done. So Conrad's right, you know, as soon as this county audit is completed and finalized, we'll roll right into the PFC the audit for 2008. And Martha, I had one more I'd like to share, because when we go into the legislative meeting in the next couple of weeks, we won't be focusing on, obviously, a lot of the auditing controls and the government-wide statements. We'll be looking at each of the funds, because what the legislator is most intent upon looking at is the fund balance for each of the funds. I thought I'd share this real quick little document here if I can. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. And Annie in the chat suggested that your voice not coming through so well is problem on my end. So I'm going to take myself off video, but I'm still here. So that might help me on the on hearing voices coming through. So go ahead, Rick.
Can you see that email there? Is that coming through?
Yeah, it's really tiny.
Okay. Well, trying to see what I can do. Sorry for being so small. In this first section here, it shows the growth in fund balance in the general fund, and it shows it going up to $54 million. Now that's our total fund balance. And if you just look at the unassigned fund balance, which we talked about earlier, that's up $4.8 million. But as I scroll down here, you can see the special grant, which is our CD fund, which includes workforce development, job training, our HUD funds, our CDBG funds. That went from $1.3 million down to $900,000. Our airport actually did quite well, even in this hectic year. Its fund balance went up from $862,000 to $1.3 million. Our road fund, or D fund, actually used money on this on purpose to help fund a couple road projects. So that fund balance went down from 1.8 million down to 745,000. The highway machinery fund went from 639,000 down to 635,000. So that's pretty constant. A brand new fund, Center for History and Culture, our enterprise fund, went to about $3 million. It stayed about the same at about $3 million, although it went up a little bit, about $50,000. Our HQ fund, which is where our capital reserves are contained, went from $4.1 million fund balance up to about $4.4 million. Our solid waste fund, even though it was projected to use fund balance this year and to actually go down, and actually went up from $2 million to $2.35 billion. So that's your solid waste or recycling. Wow. Recycling and materials management had a small increase in its fund balance. So I thought I'd share that with you. There'll be more to come. And I had this one last item here. This is from last year's finance presentation. You can see all the increases in the general fund, undesignated fund balance here for 6 years. Those six years showed surpluses of $23.4 million from 2013 up through 2018. And when you add the increase in unassigned fund balance from last year of $4.8 million, you're now up to $28.2 million. So over $28 million, each year being positive, each year being up. That is what has been generated by just the general fund over the last 7 years.
Let's just keep staring at that one for a while. What would
you like that?
Great.
So I thought I'd give you something a little bit having. I mean, we sit through so many extended budget meetings, and hands thinking about, well, how are we going to possibly work our way out of this? I just want to show you how the county has been putting money away for a rainy day for 7 years. And right now it's pouring.
Yeah, that's
How
right.
much is sales tax pouring on us now?
Yeah.
The real problem is we don't know how long it's going to rain for.
Right. Well, this really is a very helpful reminder of, that we're in this business for the long haul. We have, we have tools that other organizations don't. And if we're careful and wise, then we can get out of this. I have a couple. Are there any questions about discussion?
Your math when she's walking. You don't have to when you're walking.
Right, Shauna, we're here in your family. All right. So Shauna, I want to get any other questions out or discussion of the presentations. Shauna?
Yeah, I just, it's not necessarily a question, but I think it's needed to say that we should all be thankful for the legislatures before us, because,
Yep.
While we complain about, what we look like this year, my God, I can't imagine having not saved for the many, many years that we have, and not being in this position, because we could be just like every other county in New York that has a fund balance of $2 million in facing this crisis. So a big kudos goes out to the many legislators prior to us that were in office and had to make big decisions and were conservative with county money.
Thank you, Shauna. Dave and Mike and I will take that personally. We appreciate it.
Go for it.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions on the presentation? I want to go in a slightly different direction.
We do have a resolution then to pass.
Yes.
As the presentation winds down, your questions are answered. I just don't want to forget that, which simply accepts the audited financial report.
Absolutely. No, if my questions are going to veer too far into financial advice, just say so. But I have a couple questions. At what point, if our fund balances do go down, well, they will. At what point would it affect our bond rating? And, we're celebrating low interest rates, et cetera. At what point do we start to worry on that end?
Jason, you want me to start the discussion?
Yeah, because there's also something I also want to talk a little bit about the fund balance policy.
That's where I was
Yeah,
going.
Okay.
I was going to ask about that.
All right.
Jason and I had been working on the fund balance policy right up to about when COVID started up.
Yeah.
Right.
We got pretty derailed, but each fund in this new fund balance policy will have a designated benchmark or percentage of fund balance of which we're going to recommend to the legislature to adopt. As you know, our existing fund balance policy is only 10% for the general fund. And we're going to recommend 18 to 23% be the recommended fund balance in the new fund balance policy. And there's a lot more to it about how to restore the fund balance, whether it goes down below that mark and with it, if it goes above that mark. But the general gist of it is to show a recommended percentage for each of these funds that I just showed, the general fund being the most important, the most talked about fund. We're going to think about recommending to you a fund balance policy of 18 to 23%. Well, now with using balance and knowing that we're at around 25% or somewhere around there, we probably won't be changing it too much, but make it whatever is practical and whatever is relevant at that time when we bring it forward. And I know Jason dusted it off a number of times over the last month or two, and we just keep getting pushed off into more urgent things. So I would imagine, Jason, you can take it from here when you think you might be bringing that to him.
Yeah, no, you're right, Rick, and you captured it for the most part, Rick. We'll probably bring it forward at the simultaneously when the budget is proposed. The fund balance policy, when we looked at it, putting a range in there, we felt was comfortable because a range is probably practical because the fund balance adjusts on a regular basis. This is a snapshot in time. It changes constantly, and also the other provision in there kind of gives a time frame for should your fund balance drop below that percentage range, it provides a time frame for us to put a plan together and ultimately increase the fund balance back into that range. So it provides some policy around financial planning and security. So I mean that's all I wanted to just mention when we talk about that. As far as bond rating, there are multiple factors that go into bond rating and what determines your bond rating, and anywhere from the demographics of the community you're in to commercial and real estate values to your economy also weighs into financial management, financial health of the organization. I don't know that you can say at this point you'll drop below, because there's a lot of factors that go into it. I mean, I can also say from my experience in dealing with Moody's and the bond rating agencies is that even if you have a planned expenditure of fund balance and it's part of a planning process, even though your fund balance may drop, it doesn't necessarily mean your bond rating will drop. In fact, it may even add value to it because it was a planned fiscal approach to what you were doing. So there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not your bond rating would decrease. And it's just not as simple as this is the benchmark, and when you go below it, it drops. I would say, I think, Rick, we are one of the few counties in the state that has the highest bond rating amongst counties in the state. We do not have a AAA bond rating, but we have the second best bond rating, I think. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and I seem to understand that had a lot to do with the fact that we do have a plan. It's not just an absolute number, but that when we go into a big capital project, we have a plan. It's not an accident. We planned for it.
Fiscal planning and fiscal management is a part of your bond rating, but also the economy around you, the demographics around you, the income around you, median income, property values, all of that plays into it. And I think it's probably safe to say it would be very difficult for us to advance our bond rating. And that's probably what I think is even mentioned on the Moody's review annually.
I heard from a couple different bond rating agencies that no government in New York will ever get a triple bond rating because you're in New York State.
How about that for encouragement?
No, it means that you're
Never say never.
Yeah, we always ask for it, though. It doesn't mean we don't get it.
No, I'm just saying your
Keep
bond
working
rating.
like we're going to get there.
No, I understood that was something else I was going to say, because so much of our budget is dependent on actions we have no control over, meaning the state. Another question then, since you and Sarah folks talked about, there was a lot of conversation about borrowing at low interest rates, good use of financing at this point. Do you have any, advice about for projects that we know we have to do at some point, short, near to 5 years or so, should we be terrified to go into new capital projects, or is that actually a reasonable thing to do in this climate? And if there's more of a bill, if I'm asking for another deliverable here, and that goes beyond what your remit is right here, I understand.
Well, I guess I'm not sure what the interest rates are going to do long term. So I think I'd be conservative. I mean, you don't want to wait too long, because that might end up costing you too much money, more money than the original project. But if you let maintenance go too long, I think I would want to talk to your fiscal advisor about that and see what they're seeing out there. I just don't know with the economy, the stock market's been great and everything through this. But I don't know at some point if that's going to go the other way, because of, it's so dependent on, I think, COVID and what happens with COVID.
I've got 3 ideas on that might help us fashion our thinking going forward. Capital projects, and we are, and some of them are going to definitely get moved out because they're not they're not absolutely set in stone as to when we have to have those new buildings or those new facilities. But if you have capital projects in the capital plan and you have means of cash and reserves that have been dedicated to that in our planning for a couple of years now, there's no reason not to go forward with those. Because if we see some, and I can think of at least 3 or 4 projects that we're either right in the midst of or right ready to begin. If we have those reserves dedicated to those projects, and that has been in our planning for a number of years, I see no reason why to go forward with those. Martha's question on or whoever threw it out there on the borrowing, I would look at 2 things. I would look at the interest rates. If they're anywhere near as low where they are now, it's a great time to pull the trigger on getting some long-term borrowing locked in. Just like if you were a homeowner, have you seen how the homeowners are out there growing, refinancing the mortgages? People are improving their properties, and it's a seller's market right now. And the price of homes are going up and up. So whether it's commercial or residential, we have to look at where the market is at that time. And I think the interest rates, if they're still really low, it would be an excellent time to do some level of borrowing in February. And the other factor to look at is how busy are the contractors and the businesses around us that we'd be relying upon for these bids. How many? It seems like recently we've been going to the market when at the worst times to get some of these projects done over the last couple of years, when we just held off maybe and waited to a more reasonable time. So we have the option of going out to bid when we think it's the best time, instead of being forced into a bad decision like some of the airport projects when we just couldn't stop. Once we started, it was like a 2 or 3 year thing. Once we started choking, we just couldn't stop. And so those are the things that I think might help us gauge our decision in the next 4 or 5 months on these capital projects.
Another thing I'm going to add to when you talk about doing capital projects is, if you're going to bond for it, you're going to have a debt service payment, and that debt service payment has to be incorporated into the larger fiscal plan and the budget, because ultimately you're going to levy money to pay for that debt service. So, the question of whether or not it's a good time to go to market to bond, sure, the interest rates although they've been low for 15 years. I don't know how it continues this way. So yes, that's good. But if you don't have the means to pay the long-term debt, that's going to just as much influence your decision-making as to whether or not you borrow or not. So there's a balance, right? I mean, people are, while the money may be cheaper to borrow, which means you may be able to get a little more distance out of your money. There's a balance of, at the end of the day, that bond is going to turn into an annual debt service payment. And your general fund or whatever fund is going to be impacted by that debt service payment, to understand as to whether or not, how does that fit in the whole package, and how does it impact the whole rest of the budget. If you're adding new expense to the budget, there has to be either a revenue to meet it somewhere or another, or an expense has to be dropped off. I mean, that's part of the balancing the capital planning perspective. Rick's other point, which is very difficult to predict lately, is the construction market has been in array for 18 months, right? It was hot. I mean, it was heavy. Construction pricing was coming in 20-30% more than what it was. That's irregardless. That was just last year in general, irrespective of our bidding schedule, which was horrible. But in that of itself, it was all up in turmoil. It's hard to predict how the construction market is today. Those are all elements that go into that piece of the discussion.
And there's one last element. I think Dave brought it up in the earlier meeting today, is that it can help us formulate on which are those projects that are just got to do, those bridges and culverts and some of those emergencies. You've got to place these things in priorities. And so you're going to basically have two extremes, or two cups to fill. And one is that group of projects that just cannot be responsibly put off. And those we will move forward on, and we'll find a way to make that. And then there's other projects that are more discretionary that we just keep continuing to move those out a year or two. And that's where we can use your help.
And in your
Okay.
capital project funds, you've had, got about $12 million more or less that each of the last 3 years that are committed or signed already to projects that you can do exactly what you said, Rick, prioritize them.
Mhm.
As long as we have the Insero people here, let's pass the resolution approving their good work.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to leave. I'm sorry. I have another meeting. It was good seeing you all, folks. Thank you for the presentation.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jason.
Jason,
All right. Can we get somebody to move the resolution?
what does the resolution say?
David moves it and it says,
It says, on recommendation of the Budget, Capital, and Personnel Committee, that the audited Tompkins County financial report for the period ended December 31st, 2019 is hereby accepted.
I'll
That
second
is-
that.
okay, and that's resolution document 9494 titled Acceptance of Audited Financial Report for the Fiscal Year ended December 31st, 2019. So
Hey, found it.
found it, yeah, on the meeting portal. Okay, any further discussion? All right, let's take a vote then. Dave McKenna,
Yes.
Deborah Dawson,
Yes.
Mike Lane. You're muted.
Yes,
Sean Black.
Yes.
And I vote yes, so that's unanimous. Thank you so much to all of you. We really appreciate the hard work, especially under bizarre circumstances. And thanks to our finance team. This is really helpful to have such clear presentation and especially such good results. So we really appreciate that. Is there any other business for the committee?
And we'll see you all September 1st for the finance presentation of the activities that will be for the legislative body.
All right, thank you very much. Everybody who we won't see, have a good rest of the summer. All right,
Healthy wishes to everybody.
thank you.
Take
You
care.
too. All right,
Thank you.
all right. This meeting is adjourned. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Martha.
You bet. Bye-bye.